Hello and welcome to Craft Culture and Chemistry, Milwaukee Brew, a show taking a look under the hood of Milwaukee's brewing industry. Brewing is a precise science, and from global macrobreweries to small-town craft breweries, they all go through the same process. My name is Mike Doble. I'm the owner of the Explorium Brew Pub with several locations here in the Milwaukee area. My family owns and operates several breweries in several states. This family history inspired my wife and I to create our own brew pub brand right here in Milwaukee. In order to have a strong brand, you have to understand the basics of the craft. So let's get started with a look behind the scenes at Lakefront Brewery to learn a little bit more about the details of the brewing process. This is Craft Culture and Chemistry, Milwaukee Brew.
Lakefront Brewery first opened in 1987 and started from Jim and Russ Klisch. From humble beginnings with at-home brew kits to opening their first brewery in an old bakery. The present-day Lakefront Brewery is a local brand that pushes the boundaries on a sustainable brewing process and environmental impact as a whole. Lakefront sources their malt as well as many other ingredients from local farms. Once the malt is brought to the facility, it is stored in a large silo. Malt is sent down a hopper to weigh and crack the malt for the beer being batched. This process is milling and turns malt into grist. Grist now travels through augers to transport them into a grist case above the mash tank. The mash tank is where our milled malt is introduced with hot water to start activating enzymes in the grist. These enzymes start to break down starches and into fermentable sugars to later create alcohols for our beer. The temperatures must be carefully controlled to influence the breakdown. Once the mashing process is done, the now sugary liquid called wort is separated and sent to the brewing kettle. The now spent grain is filtered and sent to a separate silo, where a local farmer picks it up and uses it as food for livestock. Having a little sugar left and having some protein, it can be a great addition to a livestock's diet. Lakefront still uses a traditional German-made copper kettle from the 1960s. After a dormant retirement, Lakefront bought it to keep an old-style tradition connected to their brewing process. Once in the brew kettle, the wort is brought to a boil and hops are added. This is done to sterilize and build the beer's aroma and flavor. The hops are boiled down for about an hour, and once fully incorporated, the wort is ready to be rapidly cooled and made into beer. The wort, once ready to be cooled, is sent into a whirlpool. The water is cycled in a whirlpool to pull all leftover hops and other solid particles from the wort so it can be prepped to be fermented. Yeast is introduced to initiate fermentation. Yeast metabolizes the simple sugars and creates carbon dioxide and ethanol. Fermentation can take anywhere from a couple weeks to over a month. Each batch is different. Lighter beers require a shorter fermentation time, while darker ones could go weeks extra. The now beer is ready to be drained from the fermenter tank and sent into a centrifuge, where it spins up to 2,500 times a minute, as well as other fine meshing filtering. Any last solid particulates are filtered out, then sent to the packaging side of the floor, where the beer is recarbonated and left in a bright tank for further clarification while waiting to be canned, bottled, or kegged.
Lakefront Brewery is arguably Milwaukee's most iconic craft brewery. It's located in a repurposed historic building with a beautiful view right on the Milwaukee River. Now that we've seen the brewing process from start to finish, we learned there are lots of ingredients combined in different ways. But how does each ingredient help contribute to the final product? Where do we get malt and hops? How is the malt treated to make variances in beer? What exactly happens in fermentation? Well, over at Pilot Project Brewing, we got to see a full ingredient breakdown with Steve Peters. Let's check it out.
Before I explain this, I need to go back a few years to the year 1516. In that year, William IV, he was the Duke of Bavaria, wasn't even Germany yet. He came up with what's called the Reinheitsgebot, or the beer purity law of 1516. That law dictated that all beer should be brewed with just 3 ingredients: water, malted barley, and hops. Here in Germany, they abide by that law very strictly. You add other things to your beer, like cherries or kumquats or pizzas or hamburgers or whatever we do in the United States, all kinds of different things. Those are all called adjuncts. The Germans do not like that. They will not brew beer, they will not serve beer, they will not drink beer unless it's just the 4 additional ingredients. And if I start with our first ingredient, the water, we get our water from Lake Michigan. Lake water is excellent for brewing beer. It's kind of a more neutral pH, if you will. We do some filtering of it. The city does add some things to it, chlorine, chloride, other things like that. You filter those out, and then we put the water in our first vessel called the mash tun. We actually put our second ingredient in there about the same time, our grain. And the different kinds of grain we use are malted barley, wheat, rye, oats, and corn. And we get them from around the planet. All different places. We get United States, Canada, Belgium, Germany, Britain, different places we get different kinds of grain. And if I start with some grains here, actually I've got a few samples, which we use a lot more than just these here. But the few I have here, this first one is actually oats. You might have oats in your oatmeal, but we also use that like in an oatmeal stout. We did one a few months ago in Chicago. A malting company will take the grain, they take the seed of the grain, they allow it to germinate. A little sprout comes out, a little root comes out, changes the composition in that grain, it creates complex starches. They then stop that grow and then dry out the grain. That's malting. From there, they can roast the grain to varying degrees. So I've got some malt. These are all malted. So the first one is oats. These other 3 are malted barley. This next one here, this is our base malt. We've got a couple large silos outside full of this. We use a lot of that. Again, so this has been malted but not roasted. So this is really the color the grain comes in, if you will. The next one I have here is generically I'll call it caramel malt. You can see it's a little darker, so as they roast it, it gets a little more color, a little more flavor added to the beer. And you just keep roasting it, or we don't. The malting company will do the roasting. You get to something like this. This one I'll generically call a chocolate malt. It may look like chocolate, but tastes more like very puffy in a sense. And the roasting can actually be beyond this. You can even roast to black. We'll use this kind of malt in porters and stouts. Lighter color beers, if you want a roastiness, you can do that. But as you add more of the roasted grain, you actually start changing the color of the beer. It actually might even change the style of beer. If you take, let's say, a wheat beer like a Hefeweizen, and it's very light in color, you start adding more of the darker grain, it actually turns into a Duvelweizen, means dark wheat. So it's a different style of beer. But all the different grains we use, mix and mash in the recipe of what we will need to do with that. First thing we need to do with our grain, though, from our silo outside is we need to crack the grain. We do not want to grind it into a flour. We just want to crack the outer shell open. And I have another container here. This is cracked grain. It's a very coarse texture. So as you'll learn in the second step of the brewing process, I'll explain when we get to that why we need the grain to be cracked and not ground into like a flour consistency.
It's amazing how long the history of brewing really is, and how we can take some common ingredients from history and use them in modern breweries. Starting from some primitive basics to now how entire companies were built on creating and perfecting these drinks, which is truly an art form. Before we continue with Steve, we actually have a guest with us. I'd like to introduce Tim Kowalski from Sprecher Brewing. Thanks for taking time to visit with us, Tim.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So what's your role at Sprecher Brewery?
So my role at Sprecher Brewery is the brewing quality manager. So in short, I basically run the cellar, I oversee the brew house, and I help with the quality department.
Well, that sounds like it's a lot of fun, but it probably has some challenges. You probably have a lot of corralling that you're doing.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite beer you like to make?
My favorite beer, I would probably say, would be the Black Bavarian.
Okay.
I think that's just a really good dark, light beer. Dark in color.
Dark in color.
Light in drinkability.
Right. Oh, that sounds amazing. So besides beer in your job, Sprecher does make a lot of sodas.
Yes, we do.
And do you have your hands in the soda side of this as well?
Yes. So actually, part of my job, it's not part of my job. What I get to do for fun there is I get to make different soda recipes, small batch sodas that we have on tap. And it's called a soda lab, and basically I just get to fool around in a lab, come up with new soda flavors, put them on tap, and see what people think.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So when backing up, when you first contemplated working in the brewing industry, so what really inspired you? Was there a moment that that you look back to that says, hey, I really want to get into this and do this and create these flavors?
Well, I think it was two things, kind of. One thing was drinking beer and liking it, and then a part of it was family history. My great-grandpa was a line supervisor at Pabst,
wow.
in the 1900s. So part of it was kind of like, okay, beer's really cool, and maybe I should be doing this. It seems like is a family thing. So, and then I mean, I liked beer, and one of the first beers that got me into it that I didn't think was bad tasting was a carrot cake ale.
Wow.
Something that was weird, but very tasty.
Yeah, so that so you take these beers, then we combine them with foods,
Yeah.
right? Like a carrot cake beer. So basically, you're taking all these flavors and combining them. Has there been any particular challenge you've come across in combining flavors and beers, or maybe some of the sodas that you guys make?
Oh yeah, I would say. Especially when you're dealing with beers and sodas. Certain flavors come out differently in beers compared to a soda, I think. And also, like if let's say you want to have a weird flavored beer, depending on what flavor and what kind of beer it is, if it's like a stout compared to an ale, compared to a sour, I think that's one thing you have to think about flavors. But then also, soda's a little different, beer's not as forgiving with flavors.
Sure.
Or beer's not as forgiving in general, I'd
Right.
say, with the whole process. But yeah, so it's kind of like two different sports. Same concepts,
Sure.
but things can come out. Mint is a tough flavor, no
Yeah.
matter what liquid you want to put it in. Sometimes you can over mint a beer,
Sure.
and this 30-barrel batch of beer can now be down the drain, and that can be tough.
So as you deal with those particular challenges in making sodas, do you ever have to go back kind of at the tail end and adjust and get it just so? I mean, I can imagine it's probably pretty hard to hit it the first time.
Yeah, I try to do the, what's the saying? Measure twice, cut once.
Sure.
I try to do that. I do a lot of small batching. So when I say small batch, I mean like a barrel at a time.
Sure.
But then when I want to trial my flavors before I make that, I will do 500 ml samples, come
Okay.
up with a little thing of soda, do my flavors, and I'm very old school about how I do my flavors. I'll sit in a lab, have it closed off where there's no distractions, and I'll just smell.
Yeah.
And I'll smell, and I'll think how will it taste, or how will it go together.
Sure.
And then it's fun. I'm kind of like a kid in the candy store.
Sure, I'm sure the other staff at Sprecher really enjoy tasting all your creations. Well, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate you being here. Let's take a look at what Steve has to show us so that we can learn further about our dry ingredients and dive deeper into fermentation.
Now, I actually grow hops in my backyard. I have since I was in high school, and I still do today. And these are some hops in my backyard. Actually, they're not. September time is harvest time. These are plastic ones. I think the botanical name for these is Vitoloptis or something. But anyway, so hops will go on vines. They'll go 20, 30 feet in the season. They got big leaves on them. They kind of look like grapevines. This is actually the flower. We call it a hop cone. And there are dozens of varieties of hops, and the size and shape of the cone will be different depending on the variety. But what we really want to get from many of the hops is underneath the petals are oils. And we use those oils as a bittering agent. If you were to not add anything bitter to your beer, it would be so sweet it'd be sickly sweet. So you want to counteract that sweetness with something bitter. We also add hops for flavor and aroma, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, we can certainly use hops like these, the real ones, of course. They would be called wet hops, but if we did, we would need an entire truckload just to do one batch of beer. And there's an easier way for us to use hops, and those that we'd have to use it within a day or two as well. We use pelletized hops. So the hop companies will grind up the hops, shoot out little pellets like this. They come in large foil bags, and they'll last for months in the cooler. But they can be very expensive as well. $20, $30 a pound sometimes, depending on the season, the region we got them from, or where that sort of thing. And hops will go pretty much around the planet. A few places I could think of, like the Arctic or desert or tropical forest, certainly wouldn't. But most of the United States, most of Europe, I know we've gotten hops from Argentina and South America, Australia as well. But most of the hops we get in the United States are from the Yakima Valley of Washington State. A typical boil is about an hour long, and you could add hops a dozen times or more if you wanted to. More so, we do it between 3 and 6. I'll just break it down to 3 times, make it a little easier. It is always recommended to pour your beer into a glass or a cup, and you do want to get a good foamy head on there. I feel like being cheated if the beer goes all the way to the top of the glass. I did not want that. I use my fingers as an example, at least a finger and a half of full, because you want those little bubbles bursting, releasing those aromas. So when you stick your nose in that glass, you're actually tasting the beer even before you drink it. So that's the full effect there. So once all the hops have been added and the boil is complete, we then transfer the work to the fourth vessel, the whirlpool. What it does is it creates a whirlpool action, so if there's any hop or grain particles floating in there, they're collected into the center and helps clarify the work. We then run it through a chiller because it's beer boiling temperature at that point before we go into one of our fermentation tanks. So when we get into the fermentation tank, that's where we're going to add our fourth ingredient, the yeast. Now, yeast is a living organism. And what it's going to do in there is going to eat the soluble sugars we converted in the mash tun way at the beginning. And I can't say this any more delicately than this, but they're going to piss alcohol and fart carbon dioxide. Also, they're going to reproduce it there. So they're having a great time doing their thing. Now, at this point, I'm going to give you a little flow chart of beer. If you start with just beer itself, at the top, the first division would be ales or lagers. And then after that, it'll be styles of beer. And so ale styles would be like easy ones, like pale ale, India pale ale, Belgian ale, Hefeweizen, porter, stout, and a bunch of others. Lagers could be like Pilsner, Oktoberfest, Bock beer, Doppelbock, and a bunch of others as well. So the difference starts to come clear in fermentation. We will use a different yeast. Top fermented yeast they call it because they ferment near the top of the tank. It's ale yeast. Bottom fermented yeast is lager yeast. Also the temperature of the tank. With a warmer temperature, ales being fermented between 60 and 70 degrees. They could be fermented in as little as a week, whereas lagers fermenting between 40 and 50 degrees take at least 10 days, if not longer.
It's amazing how small variations in how malt is treated and where our ingredients come from, how that makes a huge difference in the impact of the beer recipe. So now that we've gone over how to brew beer and what goes into beer, we still have to go over one of the most important steps, and that's how we get this liquid into the hands of consumers. With the help of Tim, we got to see how this happens up in Glendale, Wisconsin at the Sprecher Brewery.
Starting back in 1985, Sprecher Brewery was founded by Randy Sprecher. Starting with a small and local-based brewery, has now grown to one of the largest craft beer and soda companies internationally. They now distribute in 49 of the 50 states in the U.S. and to over 23,000 stores. Well known for their award-winning and internationally recognized root beer, Sprecher has won many accolades since its humble beginnings in 1985. Our journey with Sprecher starts after the brewing and soda making process. We start with our large pallets of already printed and labeled cans made for Sprecher's sodas and beers. A depalletizer quickly moves these cans in a neat order and gets them ready to be rinsed and sanitized to be filled. Once rinsed, they are filled with the exact amount of liquid as specified for the dependent container. Once filled, the cans are given lids to seal the content inside and are further rinsed to make sure the cans are clean. After one last rinse and a moment to dry some water off, they are sent over to be packaged and later shipped. On the other side of the factory floor, the bottles are going through a similar process. Brought in on organized pallets, bottles are neatly taken off, traveling on a conveyor to be labeled with the batch of soda that is ready for the day. They are flipped to be rinsed with water and sanitizer to remove any dust or bacteria from shipping. Next, they are filled with delicious root beer and given a Sprecher emblem cap. Once capped and rinsed a last time, they're ready to be packaged. On the far side of the factory is where folded boxes are ready to be assembled to package and ship the beverages to their destination. The boxes are unfolded and glue is applied to all foldable sides so they can be sent to designated areas for filling. Once packaged and sealed, The boxes are carried over to be shrink wrapped and palletized. From here, they are ready to be sent to one of 23,000 stores where Sprecher sodas are sold.
Being able to produce so many different drinks in coordination at the same place takes a lot of planning with the team at Sprecher. Tim, since we just got to take a look behind the scenes of how drinks are commonly bottled in cans, any insight into how Sprecher managed this complex process?
I would say our biggest thing is communication. And there's several teams of people helping to plan everything to make sure that we have our product made and that it's in the correct tank and that we have correct labels and it's in the correct bottle, because the amount of soda flavors we do and different products are just kind of staggering.
Yeah, it has to take months of coordination.
Yeah.
Months. So when you're planning the next flavor, the next big flavor, you talked a little bit about earlier about how you do a little experimenting and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So do you have a body of people that come in to test those, or what do you do to kind of decide what's next?
Well, I kind of will go around to certain people or anyone that I see that are in the tap room that I know that are like receptive to kind of just trying new things, trying different flavors. I'm also very particular. I don't tell anyone what it is until they drink it, because I don't want to ruin the flavor.
Sure.
I feel like during tasting you can easily ruin something by saying what it is before they even taste it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I usually go to random people and I'm like, hey, drink this. And then,
wow, that's great. So you, I know that Sprecher has a very robust tour program, so you get this general public in there. Do you ever tap into them to try something new that you might have concocted in the lab?
Yeah, we actually we had one employee that her son was part of the 4-H club, and so we thought it'd be cool. And I told him, I was like, hey, you come up with a flavor, and so they toured Sprecher. So when they toured, I made the flavor they wanted.
Oh, that's amazing.
So then it was a chocolate-covered strawberry soda.
Wow. So do how do you, obviously there's a very loyal following there. I mean, you guys make a lot of sodas and whatnot. How do you, that's a great example of your customer engagement. How do you see that growth happening? I mean, do you get a lot of feedback from those tour groups on those flavors, and do those flavors end up seeing the light of day ever?
Yeah, I mean, we've had one flavor, black cherry, that formulated and that got into bottles and cans. But yeah, so we get a lot of feedback from tours. The bartenders will actually tell me like what people liked, what they didn't like, and I like everyone's opinion, because I feel like everyone tastes differently, and then that way you can kind of pinpoint what you're doing.
Sure.
Even if it is a flavor they didn't like, because I have made very weird flavors.
So I can imagine that as you're developing flavors and you're trying to build this loyal customer base, it's you're the quality manager. Is there any particular challenges that you've dealt with as far as the consistency goes with some of those flavors and some of those sodas that you've made? I mean, talk a little bit about that. It's got to be a very challenging job to get those consistent.
I mean, so when it comes to the large aspect, we have an awesome brew staff and an awesome cellar staff. These 5 guys are just, really good, hard workers. They know what they do.
Yeah.
Between our brew staff, there's probably 50 plus years of experience with beer making and everything. So, I think one of the main things you can always do is keep awesome records, keep track of everything, and writing all that stuff down. And now when you come to the small sides, that's where I think it's both. It's got to start somewhere. So when you're making new flavors and you're starting something new, it's all about note taking.
Sure.
And, when I'm coming up with a new flavor, I'll have my ingredient that I use, the quantity, but then I'll have like little notes like so-and-so didn't like this.
Yep.
Tastes a little weird, and then, or like if I want to cut back on one of my acids or something, I can do that.
Sure. Yeah. When in one of the previous videos, there was a talk about the variation of ingredients and how malts are treated, and hops come from all these different parts of the world and whatnot, and the barley, varies from time to time. So it's always impressive to me how brewers can take all those variations in raw materials, and then you can make a beer. We talked earlier about Black Bavarian, which is a favorite, a long-standing beer made at Sprecher, and over the years it's always been the same. So even though there's all those variances, and that really is what comes down to the art of brewing. It's great. Tim, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope those at home have learned a little bit more about brewing and are able to walk away with a better appreciation of the art form that is craft beer. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Mike Doble, and this has been Craft, Culture, and Chemistry, Milwaukee Brew.